Welcome to this special episode of Her Story Revisited with our special guest, Melanie St. James. What's extraordinary about the Sheroes of history is they aren't just women who have created synthesis, but there are certain women as sort of bond keepers that women tend to be. They express the divine feminine through architecture. And
Right.
we've done a lot of social architecture throughout our careers because when you're we've spent our careers in languages, in language handling, multilingual architectures,
Computing, yeah.
localization,
Mm-hmm.
computing, globalization, internationalization,
Mm-hmm.
internationalizing a value proposition, localizing a value proposition, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have to adjust, you begin to create repeatable systems, and
Right.
that becomes social architecture.
Right.
And there's certain people that we've met throughout our career that we've admired so much for the repeatable systems that they have developed.
Mm-hmm.
We call them social architects of change.
Right. They, instead of just solving a particular problem, they looked at that, but they looked at the bigger picture so that if they solve that problem, how then can they make it systemic or repeatable? And so they had to create a framework around which that problem and other problems that happen to be connected to it would then get solved. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Once you have it, you can replicate it elsewhere. You customize it to the need, whether it's in America, in Africa, in Asia, these problems that people have on the ground, and it's a bottom up approach. And that's something that all of these social architects have excelled in, and still today we can see, it's outlived them.
It's almost like social engineering. And what's beautiful about it is that we happen to be at a time of history now. You know, we came out of graduate school in diplomacy looking at what could you do to globalize that would create a system that would help businesses in America thrive in a global environment.
Yeah.
That would and a lot of the American companies found themselves in a need to create a local office that spoke not just the language of that culture, but spoke the sort of business sense of that culture. And so Americans had to begin to adapt.
Right.
And that's super interesting. And what's interesting about these certain women like Melanie St. James and Helen Samuels and Barbara Marx Hubbard
Yeah.
is that they created frameworks for people to gather
Right.
and to begin to solve public-private partnership
Right.
arrangements.
And they all create circles. They all created, like, think of it as a round table, making sure that everyone, every stakeholder, everyone that had a play a part to play in it, came to the table, brought their problem, brought the ideas for solution, and worked together. It sounds really simple, but you wouldn't believe how rare that approach is.
Well,
You don't see that
I
very
think the
often
thing
at
that
a high
you'll
level.
hear Melanie say a lot in this interview we're about to hear that we
Hmm.
did at Sophie's
Yes.
apartment in Cannes, when Sophie and I were in Cannes at her apartment with
Yes.
Melanie St. James,
Yes.
it was an old friend coming back because all
Right.
of us have been at this time in history right around the beginning of the early 2000s, where all of these women ended up converging on global stages and creating events that were global in nature.
Right.
And the Global Summit was one of them. And
Hmm.
Melanie St. James ran that. And
Hmm.
Sophie and I were on her board of directors.
Right.
And what was cool about it was that government showed up, non governmental organizations, NGOs showed up, but so did a lot of idea people that began to put frameworks around it.
Right.
And that's almost like software. It's like
Right.
social software.
Yeah, it's like social permaculture. Instead of looking at, you can look at a garden that way. It's an ecosystem in which, living, things live. You do the same thing, in within a culture, within a city, a town, a village, whatever it is, at a smaller scale. But you look at it the same way. Everybody comes together. There are issues. How do we solve them together? And how we leverage from each other versus asking outside help to come in that may not be tailored to what the real needs are on the ground.
So we're showcasing the Sheroes of history
Right.
because all of us were in this privileged position to see how to connect dots that had not yet been connected.
Right.
And these few change makers, when they say you can change the world, yes, you can. And if you create a repeatable system, thousands, millions of people can repeat that success.
That's right.
And that's what's been beautiful about this beginning new millennium. Globalization is going from a colonialization downward model to actually rising up and giving systems that are repeatable. This is true sustainability.
Correct. And again, there is nothing is ever wasted. It's just a matter of looking at what you have, looking at the resources that you have, and working with them. It's
And so you're going to hear Melanie run through a whole bunch of very complex social architecture things, but the net result is, if you are a business incubator and you particularly focus on social programs, then you can create a business that will sustain a nonprofit, and actually it becomes circular. And if you can do that on a global scale, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And Melanie St. James has been doing this for about 20 years now,
Right.
in different parts of the world.
Right.
And what's interesting to me about that is that these entrepreneurs are fostering entrepreneurialism themselves within the developing world.
Absolutely. They have to kind of walk their talk in that sense.
And so they're social entrepreneurs in the real sense. So let's listen to our interview in Cannes, France, with our dear friend and incredible Shero of history, Melanie St. James. Welcome to a special episode of Her Story Revisited. We are in Cannes, France, at Sophie's house.
Yes.
And we're with Melanie St. James, our Shero,
Yes.
who is director and founder of Empowerment Works and the Global Summit. And we're going to talk a little bit about social architecture and what exactly it means to be a change maker in the new millennium.
We should start also how we met, because that's beautiful in our journey.
Go ahead.
So we went to a graduate school that was called the Monterey Institute of International Studies. It's changed its name since then. And Melanie, you were there. We graduated in '87.
It's now owned by Middlebury College.
Right.
And it's a very different demographic than it was when we
But you were there a few years later.
My graduation was May 2000.
Okay, so
the Monterey Institute of International Studies was branched off of the Naval Postgraduate School and the Defense Language Institute. And it was meant to be an intensive language training school for people going into the diplomatic corps through the State Department and the European Commission at the time, precursor to the European Union.
Right.
And so we were all trained Sophie and I were trained as interpreters.
Right. You ended up doing your MBA because you decided you didn't want to go to the language.
We went into international business.
And you did the third
Melanie
degree.
Became the international policy studies expert.
That's right.
Who created social architecture systems for sustainable development. Actually, Empowerment Works, I'm going to brag you up a second.
Oh boy.
Empowerment Works really turned me on a lot when we met in 2008, just prior to the financial crisis.
Yes.
And what that meant to social architecture itself. I mean, how it is that public-private partnerships are put together, how it is that there are frameworks for a socially and environmentally sustainable business to be launched, and even this whole idea of B Corps and how to be able to create inclusivity. So maybe you could start by giving us an introduction of Empowerment Works.
Yeah, the cliff notes of
Structuring things that will make the world better. Just having a new design, as you mentioned with B Corps. What comes to mind is what was the catalyst of Empowerment Works is being on the ground in Zimbabwe through a program with the Monterey Institute,
Mhm.
a fellow student actually took us on a sustainable development seminar for a month.
Okay.
And so we were looking at like, well, what is development that's not colonial and extractive and top down? And
What is other than mining?
yeah, if we're
Yes.
not extracting or repeating, you
Yeah.
know, it's a lot of
Mhm.
international development is neo-colonial. It's like,
Absolutely.
we're
And
here
food
to fix
politics.
you, and
Right.
you know, we're here to help, but there's still more extraction. So
Right.
so what is the inverse of that? And so I'll just jump into, you know, what was the catalyst of Empowerment Works was being there, understanding, you know, what was going on in Zimbabwe, and having also done field research on human security and conflict in Senegal, in the aftermath of a 30-year separatist movement.
That's
in,
right.
in Ziguinchor.
In the
And
late 90s.
yes, I was
Mhm.
there. So I went there for, you know, looking at the conflict aftermath, and it was a direct result of the colonial divvying up and mapping of Africa, where they
Right.
cut their
Carving it out.
carved up, you know,
Yeah.
Senegal and
Senegal was France.
Senegal, but then
my
you have other countries cut into the middle,
Mhm.
and creating unnatural
Yes.
borders. So there was a separatist movement in the South, and also desertification, and they had all these challenges. And then in Zimbabwe, their issues were it was the highest percentage of AIDS orphans in Africa at the time. Over 1 million AIDS orphans in a country of 10 million people.
And
So
AZT, they didn't have access to
No.
the drugs they
No.
needed for HIV.
And their economy was completely collapsed, and they had
yeah.
hyperinflation. So even if they had the cheapest, best ARVs, they
So
couldn't afford them.
That's right.
Mhm.
So it was a real crisis.
Lots of problems.
And so the idea of Empowerment Works really came from seeing these two very different crises in totally different cultures, different ecological circumstances, political, everything, AIDS and biodiversity loss, you know. And what I saw was the solutions that were coming to bear through working with local people and local social entrepreneurs on the ground was the solution being the community itself, and that different partners, private social entrepreneurs, artists in Zimbabwe, as well as health clinics and these different actors, if they could come together in a collaboration and just follow a logical order of, okay, who are we that are concerned about the issues? What do we have here? What is
are the
needed?
resources?
What is it
Yeah.
we envision creating?
Stakeholder analysis.
Yes, a
Yes.
stakeholder analysis
And leverage that.
from the local perspective.
Right.
Mhm.
People who really understand what's going on.
So it's really kind of localizing social change.
And the response to meet local
Right.
needs.
And looking at it from a holistic standpoint of, you were talking about social permaculture. I love that term.
Mm-hmm.
This
The circularity
this
in
idea of the
permaculture.
ecosystem and how
Right.
it is that you can create an inclusive
Exactly. So
environment.
the outside conventional international development model, like Gates Foundation, you know, very classical. I mean, there's all this other stuff you could say about that.
But it's like, I will give you
Yeah.
an endowment.
We have
Idendo.
solution X.
Mhm.
We are finding where we can drop solution X, or we have all of these computers and we want to drop them somewhere. So that's
Right.
outside in,
Yes.
top-down
Yes.
development.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
And doesn't care if it's
Used or
appropriate technology,
technology
if there's
used,
local capacity to fix it.
Yes.
It's
Knowledge
so
to
much
use it.
failure. This is everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
And also the local people are like, oh, we're in need, we'll just take whatever.
Right.
And then they're burdened with all of this BS. Whereas
Right.
if it would come from the local people, then it would be organic and more sustainable. So just naturally with the philosophy like of talking to local people, them seeing what's needed, seeing what they have, it follows this thing that we call the 7 stages to sustainability.
Okay.
And that's, like you said, stakeholder analysis is a big part of it, but
Yeah.
it's what's the vision? There's an impetus.
Right.
And the vision is having local home-based care for orphans in a context that's culturally appropriate, sustainable, where they're not isolated into these institutions, that they have no social network in a culture, which is really
from the wars.
From the wars, but from AIDS. Like, this is, but in the context of Zimbabwe. So when, a lot of people don't know, but in the West, we think of orphanages. That's the classic model of dealing with orphans. But that's 6 times more expensive than having home-based care. So it's super inefficient, and there's all these negative externalities. Yes. So that's what happens when we put the Western model and institutionalize things. It's totally, and then they're cut off. They don't actually have
Catholic model, if you think about it,
as well.
Missionaries, cookie cut approach.
Yes.
It works here, you have to work
it's
over
control and command rather than local caring and integration.
Understanding the culture. There are so many cultural things that are
yes.
so faux pas that they would, if they knew about it, they go, that would never work.
And that's all because it's remote control development. So this is the catalyst of Empowerment Works, was seeing that this 7-stage approach was totally, it was observed. It wasn't just like, oh, let's do this. It was like an organic thing. And this is social architecture in the permaculture sense.
Absolutely.
Is observing what are the roles of these different sectors or ecosystem participants.
Right.
Like,
what
you
are
have
working with?
this plant feeds that one. This animal cooperates with that one in this way. Like, this herbivore eats these grasses. That herbivore eats them at a different stage. Together, they maintain a healthy ecosystem. And they don't overgraze. Exactly. And so following nature, this is the social permaculture. And so coming back to the 7 stages with these 2 initial kind of case studies of Empowerment Works, where in Zimbabwe you had the need for orphan care, as well as educating and preventing AIDS from the root cause.
So general sex education, prevention.
And understanding the problem. So what was the natural response was actually taking place already from this local social entrepreneur named Julia, and she was going out and helping orphans in the rural areas and supporting school fees for the grandparents that were trying to take care of their grandkids. And then so the project followed these 7 stages, and we had this like whole design. But then previous to that, I'd done the field work in Senegal, and it was the same 7 stages, but a completely different context, cultural, environmental,
still
and issues.
Holistic and unifying.
Well, it was
different.
The 7 stages to give the examples, the 7 stages in Zimbabwe were, orphan care. Let's just the children. So it was, the partners was Julia's Home of Happy Colors. That was the project. Julia was the social entrepreneur. T&J Fabric was her business. So that was a local cooperative that was making these children's clothes and fabrics, and they had artists. So they were working with artists. It was a business. It was a social entrepreneur. Then we partnered with schools.
Public-private partnerships.
So totally. So those are 4 sectors. There's the nonprofit, and there were local nonprofit organizations involved.
In this case, you have the for-profit funding the nonprofit.
Yes, so her business was T&J Fabrics, which also created jobs for the people in the village and could create livelihoods.
What happens when you develop women?
The women will expand.
They will create synthesis.
Expand the circle.
Bring the community.
And she was already doing it. And there's also, with the AIDS education, we partnered with an actual magazine doing AIDS education and prevention. So there's the media element, which is a 6th sector. So the structure, the body of work is the 7 stages and the 6 sectors of partners and empowerment. And we could say definitely public-private partnership, but on a more grassroots level that's more inclusive and that brings out more of the skills and unique attributes.
But we're working separately.
It's social entrepreneurs, artists in action, educational institutions,
media,
for-profit businesses, media, and nonprofits.
Oh, these are the 6.
These are the 6
and
sectors.
if you remember, the Global Summit was pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yes, so
That's
we
right.
found
A-
co-chairs that were
a means by
exemplifying.
which all
Right.
these people
That's
could
right.
And
collaborate.
those, and
That's
so
right.
the think tanks, and let's get back to that, and
Yeah.
you know, because there's a lot to cover. So the 7 stages, whereas okay, so we have the care and the
Yeah.
prevention, you know, around the
Yeah.
AIDS. The local assets were like everything that's already going on in the community.
Right.
So it was that we had the business, we had the place, we had, you know, all
you
of
didn't
these
start from
things.
scratch.
Yeah,
There was a lot of little
it never
things,
starts from scratch. There's
Never,
always
yes.
where there's the problem, there are also the solutions
Sure.
and the elements.
There's assets and there's
Yes.
resources.
Of course.
Totally.
But it's how they
And all
work
they
either
need
And the
together or
market.
is a framework.
Yeah.
A
Yes.
framework
They can
by
come
which they
together.
can
Where-
gather.
to
Yes.
come together and put things into order. So
Compound.
so the goals were to have the center, to have this program, to have the training, and then the education that's needed is stage 4. The tools and supplies, the inputs are stage 5, like what it takes to build the thing. Stage
Okay.
6 is take it to market, and so that is a way of
Social networking.
yeah, take it in social
Okay.
networking, actually marketing the products, bringing in the revenue,
Oh, I see.
making
Yeah.
it sustainable.
Right.
And then stage 7 is the culmination. This is the return. If you're in a
Yes.
permaculture model, it's
Sure.
return the surplus.
Right.
It's evaluation. If it's more of a social intervention, you're going to evaluate it and see what worked,
Yeah.
redesign. And so in that sense, it's a self-repairing model.
Right.
Or,
right.
or if it's a straight up business intervention or initiative, it's giving back to the
Right.
community and also
Right.
improving the model
And you can replicate. If the
Well,
model
just
is successful
including
in
the
one place.
community is already giving back.
But I mean, if
yes,
the
in a
model
lot
is
of
and
ways.
having them be
successful,
part of it
then
and
you can
learning.
also replicate it.
Mhm.
That model, you have to wait to go through the whole thing and come back, and you say there's surplus and things like that. Other parts, may want to do the same thing because they know it's working.
Sure, and you have it all mapped out, and you can actually go back into the 7 stages and say, oh, this
This is where we're
and
at.
then
yeah.
it could be repeated or it could evolve. So
Yeah.
that's the 7 stages. And in Senegal, with the goal being to create an institute and train locals in medicinal plant knowledge, there's a lot of it's all about the local knowledge.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes.
that was actually, I think it led to seeing things in that way in Zimbabwe, because my introduction to Africa was really about, wow, look at these. The Jola people are the largest animist population in West Africa.
Oh, that's
1
interesting.
million. And what's amazing about them is because of their animist culture, they have a consensus-based local governance system where any major decision has to be
Agreed upon.
consensual by the
Yeah.
village.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And so changing their religion is a big decision.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
that's why they're still animist. And so you had all these missionaries.
That's right.
There's a lot of
So colonialism didn't work as well.
No.
right.
No,
so
because
that's why they're
Because it
still
was
so
primarily
independent.
Catholic Church based.
Exactly.
Colonialist impetus.
And they've
one of the
not
very few
yeah,
places
in
the world.
Guinea-Bissau or
Mm.
or Gambia don't have that so much. So they've been colonized
Yeah.
more. But the Ziguinchor, and the Casamance is more independent. And that was also the root of the separatist
I
movement.
have an uncle that was a Christian, Catholic missionary and went into Casamance.
Exactly.
And I'm telling you one thing.
They're
Because my
after
mom,
it.
Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Pierre was his name. And
Amazing.
He went there, and he was there
in
for,
Senegal.
in Senegal, but it was Casamance. It
Yeah,
was called
exactly.
Casamance, which was,
That's the
under
section
French.
between Guinea-Bissau and the Gambia.
That's right. And
Mhm.
check this out. The women were not treated very well in the little
No.
place where he was. And so, they came to church, he had some programs and everything. And the men did not like that he was teaching
Helping
the
the women.
women and helping them kind of emancipate. And he thinks they poisoned him because he had
Oh, he died down
he had
there.
malaria.
No,
he
they
didn't die.
tried to kill him, but he
Oh, they
came back
poisoned
to
him.
France.
He got
and-
malaria.
So he
which
left.
you can get when you go to countries, third world countries, in Africa and everything.
Mhm.
But he had a target on his back because he was literally helping the women, and the men did not like it. And so he stayed there like almost like 8 years. It was a long time by himself. Came from Nice, the place over there, go all the way there, and then he came back. He almost died. It took him
Wow.
like 12 years to kind of get himself back. He was in a ton of pain. And when he came back, he looked at the church. I think when you're a missionary, you're on the ground, you work with the people. You can't go back to a church with all your rope and your stuff, and because you're so far away from
It's
the
different.
source. You feel like
He became sort of like Francis.
and he
St. Augustine,
yeah. He
yeah.
took his clothes and he goes, I'm done.
he
He
defrocked.
literally defrocked, and he goes,
He's like, I'm
done.
over it. This is
No,
too
there
much.
was politics. There was a whole bunch-
Post-colonial
yeah. There was so much more stuff,
Amazing.
and he had studied other religion. He had, I'd studied, comparative religion and all of that, and he, and then he continued his journey as a Gnostic.
We want to go to Senegal.
Like the Gnostic
we
gospel
should
and
go
all of that.
together.
We should go back to
Because
the
you can
Casamance.
drive for us.
I'll drive. No, there's a lot of potholes. There's a lot of
But they
potholes
drive on the right side,
because
right?
of because of the war. They weren't able to fix the roads, and so there's so many accidents. And people would take the ship to get places because the roads are so dangerous.
Wow.
And then a ship sank. Okay, but we digress.
No, but I
So-
hired Melanie. I produced this conference in Durban, South Africa, and I was so worried about driving on the left side.
Yeah.
So you brought me out there. I was
so
like,
I
how did
brought
I get
Melanie
there?
as chauffeur
I'll do that,
for
no
Madame
problem.
Gandhi when we were driving.
Oh, that's right.
And she
She
preferred
was
me.
racist as hell.
She
wasn't
didn't want the Chinese drivers to drive. She only would allow me to drive.
Yeah, that's right.
I felt very special. I was like, okay,
I've
got
She
my
was designated driver.
Yeah, and then you wanted me to come drive on the other side of the road in England, but yeah, I settled for Khan. So
it's a better deal.
so it was like seeing, this framework is relevant to these very different types of projects.
Right.
But so
it didn't remain only in Africa, though. How did you then go from Africa?
Here's the thing. What I've discovered with the 7 stages is it's a model inherent in nature. And even though I coined it and identified it and named it, I found like a decade later that it's almost identical to the community organizing model of the Elon Foundation in Brazil. And so I actually, teamed up with the founder of that. He's this amazing social entrepreneur.
Wow,
he came and he was one of the lead facilitators of the Global Summit 2016.
Oh, really?
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so the Elon, so they would actually go into the favelas with these 7 stages.
Yes.
I mean,
What?
almost
identical.
identical.
Well,
The way it's described.
That's awesome.
Right.
And so it's literally a described facilitation of the 7 stages, but in a 2-day workshop where they design an initiative based on the 7 stages.
All right. In public-private partnership.
Well, in multiple sectors.
Okay.
So they might name them a little differently, but it's more inclusive than public-private. It's like artists.
Yeah.
Like it goes into these different sectors.
I mean, they're dealing with favelas. So
Which
favelas, you don't have as much,
which is public-private, but they would say business, artists, cultural groups, community-based groups,
whatever commerce that they had.
Yeah. So, but the point is, when you have those frameworks, the point is to be inclusive. The point is, sometimes people don't feel included unless they're named.
Yeah.
But so because
so the framework helps with that.
Yes. And so in the Global Summit kickoff, the planning symposium, it was about it was also to create a global trust network with guiding principles that are based on the values identified by the participants. And so what we did is we invited up to like about 20 to 30 representatives of each of the 6 sectors, and they workshop themselves with their facilitators and co-chairs to identify 5 guiding principles for a sustainable world for their sector. So it's like, okay, if you're a sustainable business, how are you going to show up in a way that's going to contribute to a sustainable world? If you're a responsible media organization, what does it mean? And so they were saying things like, okay,
tangibly.
Yeah, tangibly. And so I think you were in that. So maybe, do you remember what those principles were?
About the Global Summit was not only did you have these cross-sector people from government, people from NGOs, people from nonprofits, people from business, all kind of collaborating together and saying, if we were to change the way we approach a social issue, and instead of coming from just a capitalist or just a begging bowl charity handout, here's a pile of money, spend it until it's gone.
Yeah, that money's going to fix it.
Right.
Hopefully.
If we were to all come together and have an actual conversation about a framework that might support one another in these efforts, how could we do that? And how could we take capitalism and have it be an integral part of funding nonprofit activity?
Something in capitalism works. There's this currently, people are really pushing back the whole Red Scare. People are over it. Younger people are starting to look at the Democratic Socialists of America is like booming right now. People are not afraid of socialism because they're seeing that full-blown capitalism isn't working, and it doesn't mean that we can't have business and exchange.
No,
Obviously, there needs to be incentive,
but democratic
aspects.
socialism is a whole paradigm that seems to be developing. And Bernie tried to warn everybody about the oligarchs and the oligarchs coming to really.
They've always been there.
Shatter stuff.
They might be there for a long time, but it's what they do with that
They've
power
pushed
and all of that, and
things so far to the right.
Thank you for spending time with us on Her Story Revisited. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow the show, share it with someone else, and please subscribe. It really helps more people discover the podcast and the channel. Until the next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and we'll see you soon.